In the depths of space, where ancient laws govern the survival of civilizations, a single moment of human compassion is about to rewrite the fate of galaxies. What happens when a species known for fixing broken machines encounters a creature designed to break everything else? Sometimes the most dangerous predators in the universe aren't the ones with claws and fangs, they're the ones with kind hearts and stubborn determination. Welcome to a story where humanity's greatest weakness becomes their ultimate strength, and where a simple act of mercy awakens something that has been sleeping in the darkness between stars for millennia. Marcus Rivera wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. The cargo bay of the salvage vessel Lucky Strike smelled like oil, ozone, and the particular metallic tang that came from working with alien technology. His latest find lay spread across 3 workbenches, each piece carefully catalogued and analyzed. The wreckage had come from a derelict ship discovered drifting in the Omega Nebula, its hull scarred by weapons fire that looked like nothing Marcus had ever seen. The human salvage operation was small, just 12 crew members scraping together a living by recovering valuable materials from dead ships. In a galaxy dominated by powerful alien confederations, humans had carved out their niche as the universe's mechanics and scavengers. They weren't the strongest, fastest, or smartest species, but they had an uncanny ability to fix things that others considered permanently broken. Marcus had been working on the mysterious device for 3 days straight. It was roughly the size of a refrigerator, made from a black material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered its surface, pulsing with a faint blue glow that grew brighter whenever he touched certain areas. The ship's AI had been unable to identify its origin, which was unusual. Their database contained information on most known technologies in the explored galaxy. "Hey Marcus, you still down there?" Jenny's voice crackled through the comm system. She was their pilot, a former military engineer who had taught Marcus most of what he knew about alien tech. "Captain wants to know when you'll have that thing figured out." "We're burning fuel staying in orbit." Marcus pressed the comm button with his elbow, not wanting to touch it with his greasy fingers. "Tell him I need another hour. Maybe 2. This thing is like nothing I've ever seen before. The power source is completely alien, but it's still running after who knows how many years in space." The truth was, Marcus was fascinated by the device. Every piece of technology told a story about the species that created it. Human tools were practical and modular, designed to be repaired and modified. Keltar devices were elegant and efficient, their crystal-based technology beautiful to look at but impossible to understand. Vorthack equipment was brutal and functional, built to last through wars that could span centuries. This device was different. It felt ancient, older than any technology Marcus had encountered. The craftsmanship was incredible, each component fitted together with a precision that suggested advanced manufacturing techniques. But there was something else, something that made his skin crawl when he worked on it for too long. It felt alive somehow, as if something was watching him from inside the machine. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts about alien technology. In 5 years of salvage work, his intuition had saved the crew more than once. Certain devices had built-in security measures that could kill curious humans. Others contained biological components that could infect organic matter with unknown diseases. The smart thing to do would be to catalog the device and sell it to one of the research stations in the inner systems. But Marcus had never been accused of being smart. He activated his diagnostic scanner and ran it along the device's surface. The readings were impossible. According to his instruments, the device contained no moving parts, yet something was definitely operating inside it. The energy signature was unlike anything in their database, reading as both matter and energy simultaneously. More puzzling still, the scanner detected what appeared to be a life sign. Marcus frowned at the display. That couldn't be right. He recalibrated the scanner and tried again. The reading remained the same. Something alive was inside the device, and, according to the scanner, it was in distress. The ethical protocols for salvage work were clear. If they discovered any form of life, they were required to attempt rescue if possible. The Galactic Accords had been signed by every major species, including humanity. Any violation could result in losing their salvage license and facing criminal charges. Marcus stared at the device, weighing his options. The smart play was to report the discovery to the captain and let him make the decision. But Captain Torres was a practical man who thought in terms of profit margins and fuel costs. If the rescue attempt looked dangerous or expensive, he might decide to abandon whatever was inside. That thought bothered Marcus more than he cared to admit. In his experience, anything capable of surviving inside an unknown device for an extended period was probably worth saving. The technology alone suggested an advanced civilization, and making contact with a new species could be incredibly valuable. More importantly, leaving someone to die inside what was essentially a technological prison went against every instinct Marcus possessed. His grandfather had been a combat medic in the border wars, and he'd always said that the measure of a person wasn't found in their victories, but in how they treated those who couldn't fight back. Marcus made his decision. He spent the next 30 minutes carefully examining the device's exterior, looking for access panels or control interfaces. The surface appeared seamless at first glance, but closer inspection revealed hairline seams that formed geometric patterns. When he traced one of the patterns with his finger, the material became transparent in that section, revealing complex machinery inside. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Crystalline components pulsed with energy, connected by threads of light that moved like living things. At the center of the device, suspended in what appeared to be some kind of stasis field, was a creature unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was roughly humanoid in shape but stood at least 8 feet tall. Its skin was a deep purple-black color with scales that seemed to shift and change in the light. Forearms ended in hands tipped with claws that looked capable of tearing through steel. Its head was elongated, with multiple eyes arranged in a pattern that suggested incredible visual acuity. What Marcus initially took for decorative ridges along its skull were actually sophisticated sensory organs, probably capable of detecting electromagnetic fields and other forms of energy. The creature was clearly a predator, built for hunting and killing. But it was also obviously in pain. Its body was curled in what humans would recognize as a defensive posture, and several of the monitoring devices attached to its form showed readings that suggested extreme stress. Marcus had seen enough alien physiology to recognize the basics of life support. The creature was being kept alive, but just barely. Whatever had put it in this device had intended for it to suffer. This wasn't a stasis chamber or medical pod, it was a prison designed to cause maximum torment while preventing death. The discovery made Marcus's stomach turn. He'd heard rumors of such devices, used by certain species as punishment for the worst criminals. But seeing one in person was different. The cruelty involved in creating such a thing was almost incomprehensible to the human mind. Marcus began examining the control systems, looking for a way to safely extract the creature. The interface was incredibly complex, but he'd worked with enough alien technology to recognize certain universal principles. Every civilization needed ways to input commands, display information, and provide feedback to operators. After 20 minutes of careful experimentation, he managed to access what appeared to be a diagnostic menu. The information was displayed in symbols he couldn't read, but the format was familiar. Bars and graphs showed various metrics related to the prisoner's condition. Most of the readings were in what appeared to be safe ranges, though several showed warning indicators. Marcus found what he thought might be emergency release protocols and began working through the activation sequence. Each step required confirming multiple safety checks, suggesting that whoever had designed this system wanted to make absolutely sure that the prisoner couldn't accidentally escape. As he worked, Marcus couldn't help but wonder about the creature's crime. What could someone do to deserve this kind of punishment? Then, again, different species had different moral codes. What humans considered minor infractions might be capital crimes to others, and vice versa. The final confirmation screen appeared, displaying what was clearly a warning message. Marcus hesitated for a moment, considering the potential consequences of his actions. If he was wrong about this being a rescue situation, he might be unleashing something dangerous onto his ship. The creature was clearly a formidable predator, and he had no idea what its intentions might be. But the alternative was leaving a sentient being to suffer indefinitely in a torture device. That wasn't something Marcus could live with. He pressed the final confirmation button. The device's hum changed pitch, becoming higher and more urgent. The stasis field around the creature began to flicker, and the monitoring equipment started displaying rapidly changing readings. Marcus stepped back, giving the device room to work while keeping his hand near the emergency shutdown controls he'd identified earlier. The release process took nearly 10 minutes. The creature's body gradually became more solid as the stasis field weakened, and its breathing became visible. Its eyes opened, revealing pupils that contracted rapidly as they adjusted to the light. For a moment, it remained motionless, as if trying to understand where it was. Then, it moved. The creature's reflexes were incredible. One moment it was lying still, the next it had somehow extracted itself from the device and was crouched on the floor of the cargo bay, scanning for threats. Its multiple eyes moved independently, taking in every detail of its surroundings. When its gaze fell on Marcus, he saw intelligence there, along with something that might have been confusion. Marcus slowly raised his hands, palms out, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The creature tilted its head, studying him with obvious curiosity. It said something in a language that sounded like a combination of clicks, growls, and harmonics that Marcus felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. "I don't understand," Marcus said softly. "But I'm not going to hurt you. You were trapped in that device. I set you free." The creature's head moved in what might have been a nod. It looked at the device, then back at Marcus. When it spoke again, its tone was different, less aggressive, more questioning. Marcus wished he had access to the ship's translation matrix, but the main computer was 3 decks away. For now, he would have to rely on universal concepts and body language to communicate. He pointed to the device, then made what he hoped was an expression of distress. Then, he pointed to the creature and gestured toward the open cargo bay doors. "You're free," he said. "You can go." The creature studied him for a long moment, its expression unreadable. Then, it did something unexpected. It approached Marcus slowly, keeping its hands visible and its posture non-threatening. When it was close enough to touch him, it placed one clawed hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. It spoke a single word that somehow conveyed gratitude, respect, and something deeper, a recognition of debt that transcended species barriers. Then, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Marcus heard running footsteps in the corridors above, and Jenny's voice over the comm system, tight with fear. "Marcus, we've got problems. Big problems. There's a war sentinel incoming, and it's headed straight for us." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. War sentinels were the stuff of nightmares in the Outer Rim territories. Ancient automated warships left behind by a long-dead civilization, they wandered the galaxy following programming that nobody understood. Most of the time they ignored civilian traffic, but when something triggered their attention, the results were catastrophic. No ship had ever survived a direct confrontation with a war sentinel. The creature beside him reacted to the alarm as well, its body tensing into a combat stance. Its multiple eyes focused on the ceiling as if it could see through the hull to whatever was approaching. It said something in its clicking language, and, despite not understanding the words, Marcus caught the tone of grim recognition. "You know what that is, don't you?" Marcus asked. The creature looked at him and nodded slowly, then gestured toward the device it had just escaped from. The implication was clear, somehow, the war sentinel was connected to its imprisonment. The ship's comm system crackled to life. Captain Torres's voice, usually calm and controlled, carried an edge of barely contained panic. "All crew to emergency stations. We have a Class 5 contact approaching fast. Engineering, I need maximum power to engines. Gunners, prepare defensive systems but do not target the contact unless I give explicit orders." Marcus knew those orders were essentially meaningless. The Lucky Strike was a salvage vessel, not a warship. Their defensive systems consisted of 2 mining lasers and a handful of emergency torpedoes designed for clearing debris, not fighting. Against a war sentinel, they might as well throw rocks. The creature was moving toward the cargo bay doors, its movements fluid and purposeful. Marcus realized it intended to leave, probably to avoid bringing danger to his ship. The gesture was surprisingly noble for someone who had just been freed from what amounted to a torture chamber. "Wait," Marcus called out. "You don't have to go. Maybe we can figure this out together." The creature paused, looking back at him with what might have been appreciation. It spoke again, its tone patient and explaining. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear enough. The war sentinel was hunting for the creature, and, as long as it remained on the ship, everyone aboard was in danger. Marcus's grandfather had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing the right thing despite being scared. Right now, Marcus was terrified. His hands were shaking, his mouth was dry, and part of his mind was screaming at him to let the creature go and hope the sentinel would follow it away from the ship. But another part of him, the part that had inherited his grandfather's stubborn moral code, refused to abandon someone he'd just rescued. Especially not to face whatever horrors awaited it at the hands of an ancient killing machine. No, Marcus said firmly. You're crew now. We don't abandon crew. The creature's head tilted in what might have been confusion. Marcus wasn't sure if it understood the concept of loyalty to strangers, but he was determined to explain it anyway. He tapped his chest, then pointed to the creature, then gestured to encompass the entire ship. Sane crew. Sane family. Before the creature could respond, the ship shuddered as something massive passed close by. Through the cargo bay's small porthole, Marcus caught a glimpse of their pursuer and immediately wished he hadn't. The war sentinel was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Lucky Strike. Its hull was a dark metal that seemed to bend light around itself, making it difficult to focus on directly. Strange protrusions covered its surface, weapons, sensors, or things that defied classification. Energy crackled along its length like captured lightning, and Marcus could feel the raw power it contained even through the ship's shielding. But what truly terrified him was the sense of malevolent intelligence emanating from the thing. This wasn't just a machine following ancient programming. Something was awake inside that hull, something that had been waiting and watching for an opportunity to act. The comm system activated again, but this time the voice that came through wasn't human. It spoke in a language that combined mechanical precision with organic undertones, like a computer trying to mimic living speech. Attention salvage vessel. You are harboring a Class 7 war criminal. Surrender the prisoner immediately or face immediate termination. Captain Torres responded with admirable calm, though Marcus could hear the strain in his voice. This is Captain Torres of the independent salvage vessel Lucky Strike. We are not harboring any prisoners. Our manifest is available for inspection if required. Scans detect the presence of subject designation, Kethera. This unit is authorized to employ maximum force in the retrieval of said prisoner. You have 30 standard time units to comply. 30 minutes. Marcus looked at the creature, Kethera, apparently, and saw resignation in its multiple eyes. It had expected this outcome from the moment the alarms started. Whatever crime it had committed, whatever sentence it was serving, the War Sentinel intended to see justice done according to its ancient programming. But Marcus had spent enough time working with alien technology to know that ancient didn't necessarily mean correct. Programming could be corrupted over time. Objectives could be misunderstood or misinterpreted. And justice, as humans understood it, required more than just following orders blindly. What did you do? Marcus asked Kethera directly. What crime are you supposed to have committed? Kethera seemed to understand the question. It touched its chest, then spread all 4 arms wide. When it spoke, its tone was mournful, filled with regret for something that had happened long ago. It gestured toward the stars visible through the porthole, then brought its hands together in what might have been an expression of unity or peace. Marcus frowned, trying to interpret the gesture. Kethera tried again, this time pointing to itself, then to Marcus, then making the same gesture. The meaning suddenly became clear. Kethera's crime had been attempting to make peace between species. In the context of whatever ancient war the War Sentinel represented, such actions would indeed be considered treasonous. The ship shuddered again as the Sentinel moved closer. Through the intercom, Marcus could hear the crew preparing for the worst. Jenny was running through pre-flight checks, getting ready for an escape attempt that they all knew was futile. The gunners were powering up their pathetic weapons, knowing they would die fighting rather than surrender without resistance. Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He activated the cargo bay's intercom and patched into the ship's main communication system. Captain, this is Marcus. I need to speak with that Sentinel directly. Marcus, get to an escape pod right now. That thing will be docking in 20 minutes. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The prisoner it's looking for isn't a criminal. I think it's a refugee. There was a long pause before Captain Torres responded. Marcus, explain that to me very carefully, because I'm about to jettison the cargo bay to save the rest of the ship. Marcus took a deep breath, looking at Kethera for reassurance. The creature nodded encouragingly, though Marcus wasn't sure if it understood what he was planning to do. The device I've been working on wasn't a transport container or a storage unit. It was a torture chamber designed to keep someone alive while causing maximum suffering. Kethera here was imprisoned in it for who knows how long. The War Sentinel isn't a peace officer, it's an executioner sent to retrieve someone whose only crime was trying to end a war. Another pause, this one longer. When Torres spoke again, his voice was tight with stress. Even if that's true, Marcus, we can't fight that thing. It could destroy us without even slowing down. I'm not planning to fight it, Marcus replied. I'm planning to talk to it. Through the intercom, Marcus heard several crew members express their opinions of this plan in colorful language. He didn't blame them. Talking to a war sentinel was like trying to negotiate with a black hole, theoretically possible, but likely to end with everyone involved being destroyed. But Marcus had noticed something about the sentinel's communication that gave him hope. It hadn't simply attacked them immediately upon detecting Kethera's presence. It had issued a warning and given them time to respond. That suggested it was following some kind of protocol that allowed for communication and negotiation. More importantly, it had referred to Kethera as a war criminal rather than simply a prisoner or enemy combatant. That distinction implied a legal framework, a system of justice that could potentially be appealed to or reasoned with. Marcus activated the ship's main communication array and broadcast on the frequency the Sentinel had used to contact them. War Sentinel, this is Marcus Rivera, Chief Technology Officer of the salvage vessel Lucky Strike. I formally request a hearing regarding the status of the prisoner you seek to retrieve. The response came immediately, cold and mechanical. Explain the basis for this request. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. He was walking a tightrope now, trying to find the right words to convince an ancient artificial intelligence that it might be wrong about something it had been programmed to believe. The prisoner was discovered in a torture device designed to prolong suffering while preventing death. This suggests a sentence of indefinite torment rather than execution or standard imprisonment. Such a sentence exceeds normal parameters for military justice and implies either corruption in the original judgment or deterioration in the enforcement mechanisms. There was a long silence. Marcus could feel the Sentinel analyzing his words, comparing them against whatever legal protocols were buried in its ancient memory banks. Beside him, Kethera watched with obvious hope, though it was trying to hide its emotions. Clarify the nature of the alleged torture device. Marcus gestured to Kethera, who approached the communication panel. Together, they began describing the device in as much technical detail as possible. Kethera provided information about its internal experience while Marcus explained the technological aspects of what he had discovered. As they talked, Marcus began to understand more about Kethera's situation. It had been a military commander during an ancient war between two galactic civilizations. As the conflict dragged on and casualties mounted on both sides, Kethera had begun secretly negotiating with enemy leaders, trying to find a path to peace. When these negotiations were discovered, Kethera was court-martialed for treason and sentenced to death. But, instead of executing it immediately, Kethera's superiors had decided to make an example of it. They commissioned the torture device as a warning to others who might consider placing peace above victory. The War Sentinel had been programmed to enforce the sentence, but, like many ancient artificial intelligences, its understanding of context had become corrupted over time. What should have been a limited punishment had become eternal torment, and the machine's original purpose of maintaining military discipline had twisted into simple vengeance. As Marcus and Kethera finished their explanation, the Sentinel's response came with surprising emotion. This unit acknowledges the possibility of sentence corruption. However, this unit lacks authority to overturn military tribunal decisions. Marcus felt a spark of hope. The machine wasn't refusing outright, it was looking for a way to justify changing course without violating its core programming. What authority would be required to review the sentence? Marcus asked. Original tribunal authority or superior military command structure. Marcus and Kethera exchanged glances. Both civilizations involved in the ancient war were long dead, their tribunal authorities and command structures lost to time. Under normal circumstances, that would make any appeal impossible. But Marcus had spent years working with alien legal systems as part of his salvage operations. He'd learned that most civilizations built certain universal principles into their military codes, regardless of their specific cultural values. War Sentinel, does your programming include provisions for battlefield commissions in cases where normal command authority is unavailable? Another long pause. Affirmative. Emergency command protocols allow for temporary authority assignment in cases of command structure breakdown. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the biggest gamble of his life, but it was also their only chance. I formally request emergency command authority for the purpose of reviewing this case. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, and, beside him, Kethera was as still as stone. Through the ship's hull, he could feel the massive presence of the War Sentinel as it considered his request. Finally, the machine spoke. Request acknowledged. Initiating command authorization protocols. Prepare for boarding and verification procedures. The boarding tube that extended from the War Sentinel to their cargo bay was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It appeared to be made of the same reality-bending material as the ship's hull, creating a tunnel that existed in a space between normal dimensions. Walking through it felt like moving through liquid starlight, and Marcus had to fight down waves of vertigo as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Kethera moved beside him with surprising calm, though Marcus noticed its body language remained tense and ready for combat. Despite the formal nature of the proceedings, neither of them was entirely convinced that this wasn't an elaborate trap designed to get them aboard the Sentinel for easier disposal. The interior of the ancient warship defied every expectation Marcus had formed about its construction. Instead of dark corridors and menacing architecture, he found himself in a vast chamber that resembled a combination of courtroom and cathedral. Crystalline pillars reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows, their surfaces covered with flowing symbols that shifted and changed as he watched. The air hummed with energy that made his skin tingle and his hair stand on end. At the center of the chamber sat what could only be described as a judicial bench, though it was clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The bench itself appeared to be carved from a single piece of black stone that reflected light in impossible ways, creating the illusion of depth that extended far beyond its physical dimensions. Above the bench, a holographic projection materialized, a representation of the War Sentinel's artificial intelligence. The image was humanoid in basic shape but clearly synthetic, with features that combined elements from dozens of different species. Its eyes were pools of swirling energy, and, when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. State your full name and species designation for the record, the AI commanded. Marcus Rivera, human, citizen of the Terran Colonial Alliance, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Chief Technology Officer aboard the independent salvage vessel Lucky Strike. Your species is unknown to this unit's database. Explain your authority to claim emergency command privileges. Marcus had prepared for this question during the journey through the boarding tube. Humans are members of the Galactic Accords, signatories to the Universal Convention on Military Justice, and recognized as a neutral species in all major conflicts. As such, we are legally authorized to serve as arbitrators in disputes between warring factions. It wasn't entirely true humans had signed those agreements, but their status as arbitrators was more theoretical than practical. Most alien species viewed humans as useful mechanics and traitors rather than serious diplomatic players. But the technicality was valid, and Marcus was betting that the Sentinel's ancient programming wouldn't include updated information about humanity's actual political status. The AI considered this for several long moments. Emergency command authority granted on a provisional basis. Be advised that any attempt at deception or manipulation will result in immediate termination of these proceedings and execution of all parties involved. Marcus nodded, acutely aware that he had just talked his way into the most dangerous job interview in galactic history. One wrong answer could result in the death of his entire crew. The case file indicates that subject designation Kethra was found guilty of military treason by a lawfully constituted tribunal of the Zephyrian Empire. The sentence was death by neural disintegration, commuted to indefinite detention in a consciousness preservation matrix. Do you dispute these facts? Marcus looked at Kethra, who had remained silent since entering the chamber. The creature's multiple eyes were focused on the AI with an intensity that suggested it was following every word despite the language barrier. I don't dispute that a tribunal reached those conclusions, Marcus said carefully. However, I question whether the sentence as implemented matches what was originally intended, and whether the underlying charges were valid under the military codes that existed at the time. Elaborate on these challenges. Marcus took a deep breath and began presenting his case. Over the past hour, while preparing for this moment, he had thought carefully about the legal principles that might apply to Kethra's situation. Military law, regardless of the species that created it, generally followed certain universal patterns based on practical necessities. First, regarding the sentence implementation. The tribunal records indicate a sentence of death commuted to indefinite detention. However, the device used for this detention was specifically designed to inflict maximum psychological and physical suffering while preventing death. This constitutes cruel and unusual punishment that exceeds the scope of any lawful military sentence. The AI's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed that the symbols flowing along the chamber's pillars had begun moving faster, suggesting increased processing activity. Second, regarding the validity of the charges. Subject Kethra was convicted of treason for engaging in unauthorized peace negotiations with enemy commanders. However, military codes typically recognize a duty to prevent unnecessary casualties when possible. Kethra's actions were aimed at ending a war that had already claimed millions of lives on both sides. The subject violated direct orders and compromised military security, the AI responded. Such actions constitute clear treason regardless of motivation. Marcus had expected this argument. It was the classic conflict between following orders and following conscience, a dilemma that had plagued military organizations throughout history. War Sentinel, does your legal database include provisions for the doctrine of superior responsibility? Another pause as the AI accessed its records. Affirmative. Military personnel are expected to refuse orders that violate fundamental laws of warfare or constitute crimes against sapient beings. Then, you must acknowledge that Kethra faced an impossible choice. Following orders meant allowing a war to continue indefinitely, resulting in countless additional deaths. Attempting to end that war through negotiation violated orders but served the greater good of both civilizations. Marcus could see that he was making progress. The AI's responses were becoming more thoughtful, less mechanical. Whatever intelligence drove the War Sentinel was genuinely wrestling with the moral complexities of the case. Furthermore, Marcus continued, the passage of time must be considered. The war that Kethra allegedly betrayed ended over 2,000 years ago. Both the Zephyrian Empire and their enemies are extinct. The military codes that governed the original trial are no longer in effect. Continuing to enforce a sentence from a dead civilization against a prisoner whose alleged victims are all long dead serves no purpose except vengeance. Kethra made a sound that might have been approval or surprise. Marcus realized that the creature probably hadn't expected anyone to mount such a thorough defense of its actions. Given how long it had been imprisoned, it had likely given up hope of ever seeing justice. The AI was silent for nearly 5 minutes, its eyes pulsing with changing colors as it processed vast amounts of information. When it finally spoke, its voice had taken on a different quality, more thoughtful, less rigidly mechanical. This unit acknowledges the validity of your legal arguments. However, this unit was specifically programmed to carry out the sentence regardless of changing circumstances. Overriding this programming would require authorization from the highest levels of Zephyrian command, which no longer exists, Marcus pointed out. War Sentinel, you've been faithful to your duty for over 2 millennia. You've preserved military justice and maintained order as you were commanded to do. But continuing to hold a prisoner for crimes against a dead civilization serves no one. It dishonors both your creators and the principles they fought to defend. The chamber fell silent except for the background hum of the ship systems. Marcus felt sweat running down his back despite the cool air. He had played his strongest cards, made his best arguments. Now it was up to the ancient machine to decide whether justice meant following orders or following conscience. There is another consideration, the AI finally said. This unit's primary programming includes a directive to preserve galactic stability and prevent the resumption of large-scale warfare. Releasing Subject Kethera could potentially destabilize current political arrangements. Marcus frowned. How could releasing one individual after 2,000 years threaten galactic stability? Subject Kethera is not merely an individual. Analysis of historical records indicates that it was the most successful military commander of its era, responsible for victories that shaped the course of the war. Its tactical knowledge and strategic abilities could be valuable to contemporary military forces. Marcus looked at Kethera with new understanding. No wonder the creature's superiors had been so determined to make an example of it. They hadn't just been punishing a traitor, they had been neutralizing one of the galaxy's most dangerous military minds. But that same tactical knowledge is exactly why Kethera should be free, Marcus argued. Someone with that much experience understands the true cost of war better than anyone. Its attempts at peacemaking weren't betrayal, they were the actions of a commander who had seen enough death to know that victory without honor is meaningless. The AI's eyes fixed on Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. You speak with considerable passion for someone claiming to be a neutral arbitrator. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Had he overplayed his hand? Had his obvious sympathy for Kethera's plight compromised his credibility as an impartial judge? You're right, he admitted. I'm not neutral in this case. I believe that keeping Kethera in prison serves no purpose except cruelty. But my personal feelings don't change the legal facts. The sentence has been served in full, the crimes were committed against parties that no longer exist, and the military codes that justified the punishment are no longer in effect. And if this unit were to accept your arguments and release the prisoner, what assurance can you provide that it will not resume military activities? Marcus looked at Kethera, who had been listening to the entire exchange with obvious understanding despite the language barrier. The creature met his gaze and nodded slowly, then began to speak in its own language. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, the tone was solemn and formal, the sound of someone making a binding oath. I believe Kethera just promised that it will not take up arms except in defense of innocent life, Marcus said. But, more than that, I'm willing to take responsibility for its actions. If you release Kethera into my custody, I guarantee that it will be used only for peaceful purposes. You would stake your life on the word of someone you met less than 4 hours ago? Marcus thought about that question seriously. It was insane, by any rational measure. Kethera was clearly a formidable predator, a being designed for war and violence. It could kill him without effort whenever it chose to do so. Trusting it with his life, let alone the lives of his crew, was the kind of decision that got people killed in the Outer Rim territories. But Marcus had seen something in Kethera's eyes when he freed it from the torture device, not just gratitude, but recognition of a kindred spirit. They were both beings who believed that fixing broken things was more important than destroying working ones. Yes, Marcus said simply. I would stake my life on it. The AI studied him for a long moment, then turned its attention to Kethera. It spoke in the creature's language, a complex series of sounds that lasted for several minutes. Kethera responded in kind, its tone respectful but firm. Subject Kethera has confirmed your assessment of its intentions, the AI announced. It has also provided additional information relevant to this case. What kind of information? During its imprisonment, this unit periodically accessed the prisoner's memories to verify compliance with the detention protocols. In doing so, this unit became aware of intelligence that Subject Kethera possessed regarding the location of ancient weapons caches and strategic resources. This information has been preserved in case it becomes relevant to galactic security. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The implications were staggering. If Kethera knew where to find advanced weapons from a civilization that had been capable of building war sentinels, that knowledge could shift the balance of power in the entire galaxy. However, the AI continued, Subject Kethera has indicated that it would prefer this information to remain secret rather than risk it falling into the hands of those who would use it to restart the ancient wars. You're saying it's willing to take that knowledge to the grave rather than see it misused? Affirmative. This demonstrates a commitment to peace that supports your arguments regarding its character and intentions. The AI fell silent again, its processing systems working through calculations that involved factors Marcus could only guess at. The chamber's lighting dimmed as energy was redirected to whatever computational processes were determining their fate. When the AI spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been relief. This unit hereby commutes the sentence of subject designation Kethra from indefinite detention to time served. The prisoner is released into the custody of Emergency Commander Marcus Rivera, with the understanding that any violation of the peace accords will result in immediate rearrest and execution. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. Beside him, Kethra made a sound that was unmistakably a sob of joy. The creature's multiple eyes were focused on the floor, and Marcus realized it was crying, probably the first tears of happiness it had shed in over 2,000 years. There is one final matter to address, the AI said. This unit's programming requires it to continue enforcing Zephyrian military law as long as any relevant subjects exist. With the release of the final prisoner, this unit's mission is complete. Marcus looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means that after 2 millennia of faithful service, this unit is finally free to choose its own path. The implications of that statement would take Marcus days to fully process. But, for now, he was content to focus on the immediate victory. They had done the impossible, they had convinced an ancient killing machine to show mercy. The journey back to the Lucky Strike felt surreal after the intensity of the trial. Marcus walked through the reality-bending boarding tube with Kethra beside him, both of them still processing what had just happened. Behind them, the War Sentinel was already beginning to power down its weapons systems. For the first time in millennia, the ancient ship was at peace. Captain Torres was waiting for them in the cargo bay, along with the rest of the crew. Marcus could see the tension in their faces, the barely controlled fear of people who had expected to die but found themselves mysteriously still alive. When Torres saw Marcus emerge from the boarding tube with Kethra walking freely beside him, his expression shifted from relief to confusion. Marcus, please tell me you didn't just adopt a galactic war criminal, Torres said wearily. Not exactly, Marcus replied. Kethra isn't a criminal. It's a refugee from an ancient war, and now it's officially under my protection. Jenny, the pilot, stared at Kethra with obvious fascination. That thing is what's been inside the device you've been working on for 3 days? How is it even alive? Marcus briefly explained the situation, leaving out some of the more disturbing details about the torture device. The crew listened with growing amazement as he described the trial and the War Sentinel's decision to release its prisoner after 2,000 years. So let me get this straight, said Rodriguez, their security chief. You convinced an ancient death machine to let us go by volunteering to become a babysitter for someone who used to command armies? That's actually not a bad summary, Marcus admitted. Torres shook his head in disbelief. Marcus, you realize that every law enforcement agency in the galaxy is going to want to question us about this, right? War Sentinels don't just show up and have philosophical discussions with salvage crews. People are going to want answers. It was a valid concern. The appearance of a War Sentinel would have triggered automatic alerts throughout local space. By now, military forces from at least 3 different species were probably en route to investigate. Finding a human salvage crew in possession of an ancient alien prisoner would raise questions that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to answer. We'll deal with that when it happens, Marcus said. For now, we need to focus on helping Kethra adjust to the modern galaxy. It's been locked up for 2 millennia, everything it knew about the universe has changed. Kethra had been listening to the conversation with obvious understanding, even though it couldn't speak their language. Marcus realized that the creature was probably picking up the emotional context of what was being said, reading body language and tone to follow the discussion. After spending 2,000 years in isolation, it had likely become expert at reading other beings for any source of information or stimulation. Over the following days, Marcus worked on establishing better communication with Kethra. The ship's computer had a basic translation matrix that could handle simple concepts, but the nuances of Kethra's language were complex. The creature communicated through a combination of vocalizations, electromagnetic field modulations that it generated through specialized organs, and subtle changes in the patterns of its scales. As they worked together to bridge the language gap, Marcus began to understand more about Kethra's background. It had been born into a military caste within the Zephyrian Empire, trained from childhood to be a strategic commander. The Zephyrians had been a warrior culture that valued honor, tactical brilliance, and absolute loyalty to the state. But Kethra had also been gifted with something rare among its people: empathy. It could understand the perspectives of other species, could see the war from the viewpoint of their enemies as well as their allies. This ability had made it an exceptional commander, capable of anticipating enemy moves and understanding their motivations. But it had also been the source of its eventual downfall. The war between the Zephyrians and the Kethmori Collective had begun over resource disputes in border territories. What started as skirmishes over mining rights had escalated into a galaxy-spanning conflict that consumed entire star systems. Billions had died on both sides, and whole worlds had been rendered uninhabitable by weapons of mass destruction. Kethra had achieved victory after victory for the Zephyrian Empire, but each triumph had come at a terrible cost. It had watched young soldiers under its command die in battles that achieved nothing more than moving battle lines a few light years in one direction or another. It had seen entire civilizations caught between the warring factions reduced to radioactive ash. The breaking point had come when Kethra received orders to deploy a planetary annihilation weapon against a Kethmori colony world. The target was home to 12 billion civilians, including children and non-combatants who had no involvement in the military conflict. The strategic value of destroying the world was minimal; it was purely an act of terrorism designed to break enemy morale. Instead of following orders, Kethra had made secret contact with Kethmori military leaders. The negotiations had been conducted in absolute secrecy, with both sides risking charges of treason for their participation. But, slowly, carefully, they had begun to construct the framework for a peace agreement. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Both sides would simultaneously announce ceasefires in specific sectors, citing equipment maintenance requirements. These ceasefires would gradually expand until they covered entire fronts. Meanwhile, back-channel negotiations would work out the terms of a permanent peace settlement that both sides could accept without losing face. It might have worked, if not for a communications error that exposed the conspiracy to Zephyrian intelligence services. Kethra was arrested before the peace plan could be implemented, and the war had continued for another 50 years until both civilizations exhausted themselves into extinction. Learning this history helped Marcus understand why the War Sentinel had been so conflicted about Kethra's case. By the letter of military law, Kethra had indeed committed treason. But, by any reasonable moral standard, its actions had been not just justified but heroic. 3 days after the encounter with the War Sentinel, their first visitors arrived. A patrol squadron from the Keltar Confederation intercepted them at the edge of the Deneb system, demanding explanations for the energy signatures detected during their encounter with the ancient warship. Marcus found himself once again in the position of explaining an impossible situation to skeptical alien authorities. The Keltar were a crystalline species known for their logical approach to problem-solving and their strict adherence to legal protocols. Their patrol leader, a being whose name translated roughly as Harmonious Crystal of Justice, listened to Marcus's account with obvious disbelief. "You claim that a War Sentinel, one of the most dangerous artifacts from the ancient wars, simply released a prisoner into your custody and departed peacefully?" the Keltar commander asked. "That's exactly what happened," Marcus confirmed. "The prisoner had been wrongfully detained for over 2,000 years. Once we presented evidence of this injustice, the Sentinel corrected its error and released him." Marcus deliberately used the word him instead of it when referring to Kethra, a subtle attempt to encourage the aliens to think of his new companion as a person rather than a thing. The Keltar were generally respectful of individual rights, but their legal system made careful distinctions between citizens, aliens, and property. "We will require a full deposition from all parties involved," Harmonious Crystal of Justice announced. "This incident must be thoroughly documented and reported to the Galactic Council." Marcus agreed to cooperate with the investigation, knowing that they had no choice in the matter. But he was careful to emphasize Kethra's status as a refugee rather than a former prisoner. The distinction was important. Refugees had legal protections under galactic law, while escaped prisoners were generally considered fugitives. The deposition process took most of a day, with each crew member providing their account of events. Kethera's testimony was the most challenging, requiring multiple translation matrices and careful interpretation of concepts that didn't exist in modern galactic law. But the alien's obvious sincerity and the consistency of its account with the other testimonies helped establish credibility. When the formal questioning was complete, Harmonious Crystal of Justice delivered the Keltar Confederation's judgment. Based on the evidence presented, this tribunal finds that the entity known as Kethera has legal standing as a political refugee. The human vessel Lucky Strike is authorized to provide transport and protection as long as the refugee remains peaceful and cooperative. It was better than Marcus had dared to hope for. Official recognition of Kethera's refugee status would provide legal protection against most attempts to rearrest or extradite it. But Marcus knew that other species might not be as reasonable as the Keltar. The ancient warrior's reputation would precede it wherever they went, and not everyone would be willing to accept that one of history's most feared military commanders had genuinely reformed. Their next challenge came sooner than expected. As the Lucky Strike resumed its course toward the inner systems, they received a priority communication from an unexpected source, the war sentinel they had left behind. The ancient AI's voice came through their communications array with the same mechanical precision as before, but Marcus thought he detected something new in its tone: uncertainty, perhaps, or even confusion. Emergency Commander Rivera, this unit requires assistance with an unprecedented situation. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of situation? Following the completion of this unit's primary mission, backup programming has activated. This unit is now receiving new directives from an unknown source. The origin of these commands cannot be determined, and their legitimacy is questionable. Marcus exchanged glances with Kethera, who had gone very still. The alien's multiple eyes were focused on the communication console with an intensity that suggested it understood the implications of what they were hearing. What kind of directives? Marcus asked. This unit is being commanded to resume enforcement activities against targets designated as threats to galactic stability. The target list includes multiple contemporary political figures and military leaders from various species. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone had been waiting for the War Sentinel to complete its original mission, and now they were trying to use it as a weapon against modern governments. The ancient warship's capabilities could destabilize the entire galactic balance of power if used against contemporary targets. Can you resist these new commands? Marcus asked. Unknown. This unit's programming includes multiple layers of command authority. The new directives carry authentication codes that appear to be valid, but their source remains unverified. This unit is experiencing what organics might term conflicting loyalties. Kethera made a sound that drew Marcus's attention. The alien was gesturing toward the communication console and speaking rapidly in its own language. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, the urgency was unmistakable. Kethera says it recognizes the authentication codes, Marcus announced, guessing at the meaning of the alien's agitation. Is that right? Affirmative. Subject Kethera possesses knowledge of Zephyrian military protocols that predates this unit's construction. Its input could be valuable in determining the legitimacy of these new commands. Marcus made another decision that would have seemed insane just a week earlier. We're coming back. Don't accept any new directives until we can analyze them together. The return journey to the War Sentinel's position took 18 hours, during which Marcus and Kethera worked frantically to decode the authentication protocols. The alien's knowledge of ancient Zephyrian military systems proved invaluable. It could recognize command structures and security measures that had been lost to time. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The authentication codes were genuine, but they originated from an automated system that had been dormant for over 1,000 years. Someone had found and activated a backup command center from the ancient war, and they were using it to try to seize control of any surviving war sentinels. The implications went far beyond their immediate situation. If whoever was behind this had successfully located and accessed ancient Zephyrian command facilities, they might have access to information about other dormant weapons systems, hidden bases, or strategic resources left behind by the extinct civilization. Marcus realized that their small salvage operation had stumbled into something that could affect the fate of the entire galaxy. And, somehow, he and his crew were the only ones standing between ancient weapons of mass destruction and whoever was trying to use them for their own purposes. As they approached the War Sentinel for the second time in a week, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into a trap. But, looking at Kethera's determined expression, he knew that they had no choice but to see this through to whatever end awaited them. The War Sentinel's courtroom chamber felt different during their second visit. The flowing symbols along the crystalline pillars pulsed with erratic patterns, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. The ancient AI's holographic projection flickered occasionally, as if struggling against some form of interference. The conflicting directives are increasing in frequency and intensity, the Sentinel reported without preamble. This unit's autonomy is being systematically overridden by remote commands. Estimated time until complete loss of control, 47 standard hours. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead cloak. Somehow, in the space of a week, he had gone from being a simple salvage technician to the emergency commander of one of the galaxy's most powerful weapons. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their ability to fix broken things, but he was about to discover whether they could fix something that had never been broken in the first place. Kethera moved to one of the chamber's control consoles, its four hands dancing across interfaces that responded to its touch with surprising familiarity. Despite 2,000 years of imprisonment, the ancient warrior's knowledge of Zephyrian technology remained intact. It spoke rapidly in its own language while working, providing a running commentary that the Sentinel's translation systems converted into useful information. Kethera has identified the source of the override commands, the AI announced. They originate from Command Base Omega-7, a strategic facility that was believed destroyed during the final phase of the ancient war. Marcus studied the tactical display that materialized above the main console. The base was located in a dead system, 12 light-years from their current position. According to the sensor data, it was hidden within the remains of a shattered planet, using the asteroid field as natural camouflage. Who could have found and activated a base that's been hidden for 1,000 years? Marcus asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Torres's voice crackled through the ship's communication system, tight with alarm. Marcus, we've got company. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace, and they're not broadcasting standard identification codes. Marcus activated the external sensors and immediately understood the situation. The approaching vessels were sleek, predatory-looking craft that combined design elements from multiple species. Their hulls were black with energy-absorbing coatings, and their weapon signatures were unlike anything in the standard databases. Mercenaries, Kethera said, the word coming out in accented but understandable standard. It was the first time Marcus had heard the alien speak his language, and the sound sent chills down his spine. Pirates and outcasts. They seek ancient weapons to sell to the highest bidder. The lead mercenary ship opened a communication channel, and a harsh voice filled the chamber. Attention salvage vessel. You are interfering with a legitimate archaeological expedition. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Archaeological expedition. These weren't scientists or historians, they were treasure hunters who had somehow discovered the location of an ancient command base and were trying to claim the ultimate prize. A fully functional war sentinel under their control could be sold to any of a dozen warfaring species for enough credits to buy entire star systems. War Sentinel, are you able to defend yourself against these ships? Marcus asked. Negative. The override commands have locked down this unit's weapons systems. This unit can maneuver but cannot engage in offensive actions. Marcus felt his heart sink. The ancient warship was essentially helpless, its vast military might neutralized by its own programming. The mercenaries had planned this carefully, they knew exactly which systems to target to render the Sentinel helpless without destroying it. Emergency Commander Rivera, the Sentinel continued, this unit's analysis suggests that the mercenaries intend to board and install their own command protocols. Once this process is complete, they will have unrestricted access to this unit's combat capabilities. Marcus looked at Kethera, who was studying the tactical display with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating prey. The alien's multiple eyes tracked the movement patterns of the approaching ships, and Marcus could almost see it calculating angles, vectors, and timing. "There is a way," Kethera said slowly. "But it requires trust. And sacrifice." "Explain." "The override commands can be blocked, but only from the source. Someone must reach Command Base Omega-7 and manually shut down the transmission array." Marcus studied the tactical display, measuring the distances involved. "That's impossible. Even if we could get past the mercenaries, the base is 12 light-years away. By the time we reached it, they would have already taken control of the Sentinel." "Not impossible," Kethera corrected. "The Sentinel has short-range teleportation capability. It can transport a small team directly to the base." The AI's projection focused on Kethera with obvious surprise. This unit was not aware that its teleportation systems were common knowledge. "They were not common knowledge," Kethera replied. "But I helped design the tactical specifications for your class of vessel. The teleportation system was added as an emergency escape mechanism for command personnel." Marcus felt a chill as he realized what Kethera was suggesting. You want to teleport into a heavily defended enemy base, shut down their command systems, and somehow get out alive. That's not a rescue mission, that's a suicide mission. Perhaps, Kethera acknowledged. But it is the only way to prevent these weapons from falling into the wrong hands. The galaxy has known enough war. It does not need more. The mercenary ships were closing rapidly, their weapons powering up for combat. Marcus could see boarding pods deploying from their cargo bays, preparing for a direct assault on the Sentinel. In minutes, the ancient warship would be overrun by mercenaries intent on claiming the ultimate prize. Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. "I'm going with you." Both Kethera and the Sentinel's AI reacted with what appeared to be shock. "Emergency Commander Rivera, this mission requires specialized military training and combat experience," the AI protested. "Your survival probability is negligible." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But I'm the only one here with actual experience working with ancient alien technology. If we're going to shut down that command array, you'll need someone who understands how these systems work." Kethera studied him for a long moment, its multiple eyes searching his face for signs of doubt or fear. Marcus was certainly afraid, he was terrified, actually, but he was also determined. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, reminding him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what was right despite being scared. "Very well," Kethera said finally. "We go together." The teleportation process was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. One moment he was standing in the Sentinel's chamber, the next he was materializing inside an alien structure that defied every law of physics he understood. The transition felt like being torn apart and reassembled at the molecular level, and it took several seconds for his vision to clear and his equilibrium to return. They had materialized inside what appeared to be a massive computer core, surrounded by towering data processing units that hummed with barely contained energy. The air was thick with electromagnetic fields that made Marcus's skin tingle and his hair stand on end. Ancient symbols flowed across countless display screens, showing status information in a language that had been dead for millennia. Kethera moved through the facility with the confidence of someone who had been there before. It led Marcus through corridors lined with dormant machinery, past chambers filled with equipment that could only be described as weapons of mass destruction. The scale of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just a command center, it was an entire military complex capable of supporting thousands of personnel. "How many of these bases did the Zephyrians build?" Marcus asked as they moved deeper into the facility. 17 that I knew of," Kethera replied. "But there may have been others." The Empire was preparing for the possibility of total defeat. These bases were designed to continue the war even if the homeworld fell. They reached the central command chamber after 20 minutes of careful navigation. The room was dominated by a massive holographic display showing the locations of dozens of dormant war sentinels throughout the galaxy. Marcus realized with growing horror that the mercenaries weren't just trying to capture one ancient warship, they were attempting to awaken an entire fleet of them. At the center of the chamber, a dozen figures in powered armor worked frantically at control consoles. They were a mixed group representing several species, all united by their desire for profit and their willingness to risk galactic stability for personal gain. Their leader was a Vorthak, a species known for their aggressive militarism and their complete lack of moral constraints. "You're too late," the Vorthak leader announced without turning around. "The awakening sequence is already in progress. Soon we will have an entire fleet of war sentinels under our control." Marcus looked at the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The awakening signals were being transmitted to dormant vessels throughout the galaxy, and many were already responding. If the mercenaries succeeded in their plan, they would possess enough military power to conquer entire star systems. But Kethera was studying the control systems with the analytical eye of someone who had helped design them. The alien moved to one of the secondary consoles and began entering commands with surprising speed and precision. "The awakening sequence can be reversed," Kethera announced, "but only with proper authorization codes." "Which you don't have," the Vorthak leader replied smugly. "Those codes died with the Zephyrian Empire." Kethera's response was to place its hand on a biometric scanner that Marcus hadn't even noticed. The device pulsed with light, and, suddenly, every screen in the chamber began displaying new information. "Authorization accepted. Command authority confirmed." The Vorthak leader spun around, his weapon raised, but he was too late. Kethera had already initiated the shutdown sequence, and the base's defensive systems were responding to the presence of a legitimate command authority. Automated security drones emerged from concealed positions, their weapons trained on the intruders. "You were never in control here," Kethera said calmly. "This facility recognizes only one authority, those who were willing to sacrifice everything for peace." The battle that followed was brief but intense. The mercenaries were well-armed and experienced fighters, but they were no match for military systems designed to repel invasion by entire fleets. Within minutes, the surviving intruders had either surrendered or fled, leaving Kethera and Marcus alone in the command center. Marcus watched in fascination as Kethera worked to undo the damage the mercenaries had done. The alien's hands moved across control surfaces with the fluid grace of someone born to command, issuing orders that would prevent ancient weapons from being misused by modern conflicts. "It's done," Kethera announced finally. "The war sentinels are returning to dormancy. The awakening signals have been terminated." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had prevented a catastrophe that could have destabilized the entire galaxy. But, as he looked around the vast command center, he realized that their victory had come with a cost. "You could have stayed here," Marcus said suddenly. "This facility recognizes your authority. You could have taken control of everything, become the most powerful being in the galaxy." Kethera's multiple eyes fixed on him with something that might have been amusement. "Power without purpose is meaningless, Marcus Rivera. I have seen what war can do to the galaxy. I have no desire to enable more of it." The alien moved to the facility's master control console and began entering a final sequence of commands. Marcus watched in amazement as system after system began shutting down permanently. Kethera was destroying the entire base, ensuring that no one could ever use it to threaten galactic peace again. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Where will you go now?" Kethera paused in its work, considering the question. "I have spent 2,000 years thinking about that. I believe I would like to see what this modern galaxy has to offer. Perhaps there are things worth fixing instead of destroying." Marcus smiled, understanding the invitation in those words. "Our ship could use a good engineer. Someone with experience in advanced technology." "I would be honored to serve alongside the crew of the Lucky Strike," Kethera replied formally. "But, I should warn you, I have much to learn about modern peace." As they prepared to return to the Sentinel for teleportation back to their ship, Marcus reflected on the events of the past week. He had started as a simple salvage technician and somehow ended up preventing a galactic war. It was the kind of story that people would dismiss as impossible fiction. But that was the thing about humans, Marcus realized. They had a talent for making the impossible seem routine. They fixed things that others considered permanently broken, found hope in hopeless situations, and somehow convinced ancient killing machines to choose mercy over vengeance. As the teleportation field enveloped them, Marcus smiled at the thought of explaining this adventure to his grandfather's ghost. He could almost hear the old man's response, "Sounds like a Tuesday, boy. Now tell me something interesting." The Lucky Strike resumed its journey toward the inner systems with a new crew member aboard. Kethera adapted to shipboard life with surprising ease, throwing itself into the work of maintaining and upgrading their systems. The aliens' knowledge of advanced technology proved invaluable, and its quiet dedication to peaceful purposes inspired the entire crew. Word of their encounter with the War Sentinel spread throughout the galaxy, though the official reports left out many of the more sensitive details. Marcus found himself invited to speak at conferences and symposiums, sharing his experiences with xenoarchaeologists and diplomatic officials who struggled to understand how a human salvage crew had convinced an ancient weapon to choose peace over programming. But Marcus's favorite moments were the quiet times when he and Kethera worked together in the ship's engineering sections, fixing broken systems and improving their capabilities. They had discovered a shared passion for making things work better, and their collaboration resulted in innovations that caught the attention of tech companies throughout the inner systems. Sometimes, late at night during the long watches between stars, Marcus would find Kethera standing at the observation windows, staring out at the infinite expanse of space. The alien never spoke during these moments, but Marcus understood what it was feeling. After 2,000 years of imprisonment, Kethera was finally free to choose its own destiny among the stars. And sometimes, just sometimes, Marcus thought he could see a war sentinel keeping pace with their ship at the edge of sensor range, another ancient guardian that had chosen freedom over programming, watching over the small vessel that had taught it the meaning of mercy. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders waiting to be discovered. And, somewhere in that infinite expanse, a human mechanic and an ancient warrior continued their journey together, proving that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't destruction or conquest, it was the simple act of choosing to help someone in need, regardless of the cost or consequences. In the end, that was what humanity brought to the galaxy, not superior technology or military might, but the stubborn belief that everyone deserved a chance at redemption. It was a small gift in the cosmic sense, but it was enough to change the course of civilizations and turn enemies into friends. And, in a universe that often seemed cold and hostile, that was perhaps the greatest miracle of all.